Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. Well, the theme is family. It feels like a family gathering. Ardizzone was born in 1900, died in 1979. Feels like he's been part of my life forever, and very actively and intimately he's been part of my life since 1979, when I moved to Maida Vale, where he lived and worked for so many years. And in 1980 I had my first illustrators exhibition, and we had Ardizzone, who I will establish is my second favourite illustrator ever, after Keith Robinson. 1980 we first showed him, and he's had pretty much a chapter every single year in our illustrators catalogue and our exhibition. He has an enormous amount of love and following from two generations here that grew up with the books, and hundreds that have been introduced to him since. He is an important part of what makes this gallery happy and makes us tick. It's one of the few regrets that I have in illustrators that I never met him. I think I would have loved him. Bibulous, gently bibulous, non-pejorative, charming. I've read so much about him, I feel I know him, and I regret that I never met him. So I moved into Maida Vale, and he died the year before. Some people will do anything to avoid seeing him. The solution to not knowing him was, first of all, 2 years ago I got Christopher Frayling along, and he gave a great talk. And he met him as a young man, was very, very taken with him. He was instructed at the Royal College of Art when Christopher was nobody at all, to look after him, and he said it was one of the best evenings of his life. 2 years on, we've got real family this time. We've got the grandson, Dominic Clemence, who remembers fondly and is going to impart some of that close memory to you now. Dominic Clemence.
Well, that's certainly beautiful in itself, and many people probably would have loved to have met my grandfather. Indeed, he was an incredibly, exceptionally convivial man, and many of my memories do actually revolve around many of the parties that as children we too were involved with. Christopher has invited me here to say a few words, and in preparing these words it sent me on a bit of a journey myself, actually, and made me reflect on the time that I remember him both at 130 and in later years when he moved down to Kent, and how he engaged with us both through his drawing and as a personality, and how wonderful it was being with him. And it brings us to the title of this exhibition, The Human Touch. I will read from the document because there's no way I can memorise this lot, and it's sequential. The Human Touch is beautifully, appropriately titled, because that is what my grandfather was like: incredibly sensitive to his surroundings, observational and clear-sighted. He had the capacity to gather visual insight into the human dynamic, often recorded in his sketchbooks or by memory, like snapshots that he could composite in his imagination to tell stories with his drawings. Sorry, yeah, we do have a series of pictures, some of which will have to be, some of them might need to be turned. But he does so much more than illustrate. Next picture, please. Yes. Which I'll need to turn. His drawings are like a butterfly net that captures the very essence of a scene, the ephemeral, the air that exists between characters. You can hear the conversation, smell the fusty atmosphere, and taste the ale in a 1940s London pub. Hear the storm at sea, or bathers splashing in a river. Hear the whistles and shrieks of the funfair, Feel the tension between the vile sea captain and Tim. Hear the mocking of the crew. Be present in the picture. Be with the picture. Next picture, please. He had an incredible visual memory. It is in part this that made him such an extraordinary artist, who would be out on the street or in the field with his sketchbook making notes that he would later use for his paintings. If you ever see his sketches from the time stationed in France, North Africa, the Allied landings in Sicily, retreat through Belgium, London during the Blitz, aftermath in Bremen, you get a very clear understanding of the way he viewed the immediate world around him. His pictures were not epic, but his output was, and collectively they made a powerful narrative. By the end of the war, he handed over more than 300 paintings to the War Office, documenting the human spirit and the human cost. Some will make you laugh, and some, as you share the moment with the painting, will want to make you cry with a pathos as fresh today as it must have been at the time. With wonderful economy of style, he captured the tragedy, showing not death, but devastation. But he didn't dwell on the morbid. He would also draw the perfunctory, the business of conflict. Change picture, please. When back on the home shore, he drew the moral spirit of the country, depicting a resilience, a strong cohesion, a camaraderie, an unwavering spirit that could not be defeated. Scenes in pubs and streets, men and women stealing glances at each other, gathering on corners, going around the day-to-day business, despite the horrors that they were living through. My grandfather, the war hero, is the person who, during the Allied invasion of Sicily, in search of a good lunch, walked with his friend up the mine-laden route to Taormina, passing through the small town of Giardini, dressed in his officer's uniform with nothing more than a sketchbook and a pencil. They turned the corner to be faced by a company of Italian infantry armed with machine guns. Oops. My grandfather held them and demanded to see the commanding officer, mistakenly thinking they were Germans. The tenente and the subtenente came forward. My grandfather demanded their revolvers, which they reluctantly handed over. After a few moments, the tenente and his assistants realised that they were British, and the troops burst into applause and cheers. Over a good lunch of pasta and champagne, my grandfather and his friend contacted the commander of Taormina and told him to report at once to them. After a short and nervous wait, he appeared with his adjutant. They told him the town was surrounded and he must surrender, disarm his troops, numbering 400, and march them south. Over another glass of champagne, he meekly capitulated. Taormina, taken with a sketchbook and a 2B. The following day, change picture. Oh, sorry, that's right. The following day, he was in the field drawing casualties with their legs blown off. He didn't cope well with the violence of war and spent less attention to the macabre. I think he preferred to view the war through his very kind and gentle eye, depicting the positivity of the human spirit in the teeth of adversity. According to my mother, he loved his time during the Second World War. Looking through his work, it suggests a seemingly convivial attitude towards it, but the collective works are punctuated like a well-edited film with moments of utter horror and sadness. I was born in 1958. Yeah, good. My early memories of my grandfather are from 130 Elgin Avenue, Maida Vale, though my mother would have pooh-poohed that, saying it was Paddington. Like my grandfather, I think she preferred the seamier side of the street. The large Victorian house was bought by his father, Auguste Ardizzone, who had a wonderful idea that he wanted a house for the whole extended family. In his time, that never happened. In my time, it did. Uncles, aunts, great-aunts, cousins. The house was a mystery to me. Sooty exterior, large and imposing interior, with an endless staircase from the ground to the first floor, and then on another endless climb to the top floor, where we were never allowed to go. I think it was Great Aunt Betty who lived up there, and she was not to be disturbed. Apparently, my great-grandfather, Auguste, Italian parentage, naturalised French, lived a life in the tropics, was very rarely there. Too cold. He preferred to be in Algeria or the south of France. The seedier end suited my grandfather well. Memories of driving from our home in Richmond, staring out of the window as we drove around Shepherd's Bush, touching on the grand mansions of Notting Hill, before turning left down Portobello Road. I stared through the car window at the shifting cultural landscape. A boy from Richmond, surprised and a little amazed. It must have been the throes of Windrush, and the post-war communities were a shifting kaleidoscope, polarised. My earliest memories were 16 or 17 years after the end of the war. The war, to me, was ancient history. London hadn't really recovered. It was exhausted and poor. I was conscious of the poverty, but also of the vibrance and the optimism. I always puzzled at how one could travel a short distance and around one bend the faces would change from predominantly white and then a single turn, mostly back. Elgin Avenue sat on a threshold, a beautiful cultural melting point of Afro-Caribbean, Irish economic immigrants and shell-shocked Londoners. It was right up my grandfather's street, active, vibrant, unpredictable and dynamic. Excuse me. I'm missing a page. Oh no. Okay, yes, thank you. Memories of 130. Between my aunt and uncle in the basement and the never-to-be-seen great-aunt on the top floor, my grandparents lived mostly on the middle two floors. The ground floor front room was an occasional refuge for guests who couldn't manage their way home after common garrulous parties that would take place in the large L-shaped room, which was multifunctionary. Living room, dining room and studio. As many would recognise from his self-portraits, his desk was on a raised stage, sitting in a huge bay window. It was surrounded by paraphernalia, scratchy pens, pencils, paintbrushes and inks. On his desk, a large sheet of blotting paper and maybe a work in progress. All around the desk, fastened with brass drawing pins, were little drawings and doodles, an idea that might have sprung to mind. As if an office job, he worked at his station from 9 till 5 every day, as regular as clockwork, stopping for lunch and later for a whiskey at the end of the day. As children, we were welcome to parties, where we mingled with characters like Graham Greene and James Reeves, Henry Moore and Francis Bacon. I, thigh high to the crowd, staring up through the clouds of smoke at the literary and artistic titans of our time. Would be put to bed in the ground floor front room, where I'd lie watching the silhouettes passing the sodium orange net curtains, listening to the resounding clack clack of the git-gat shoes worn by ladies back from the pub, arm in arm with their partners. My grandfather's drawings etched in my mind. I reached out to my sister Susanna, who's here this evening, so there's two of us. And my brother Quentin, when writing this, Quentin wrote very movingly, truthfully, and with pathos that made me want to shed a tear. He says, he wasn't a very keen granddad. His idea of treating grandchildren was to send us out to get some fresh air and leave him to get on with the grown-up stuff. Do you remember? He treated us all to that fishing trip in Deal. We were horribly seasick. Another day in Deal, he took us to a wrestling match. That was fun. He loved the theatre of wrestling. The entangled bodies, the grimacing faces. Remember though, he hated violence. He would regard this as theatre. He would see these events as research through experience, watching the audience as closely as the main bout. He would always go back and draw. Quentin goes on to say, when we stayed with Granny and Grandpa, we would be packed off on a canal trip with Granny. Her favourite was the zoo. He would have loved all those things, but Granny was expected to take us. And it's the point, to be fair, he had a balance problem that was caused by an infection in his inner ear. Some years before, as far as I can remember, he never walked without a stick. Quentin writes on, things like Knickerbocker Glory at Lyon's Corner House, walks in the cherry orchards in Kent, the fun fair on Sheppey, Stig's Dump, which was a place that existed, a box to see the Nutcracker with Turkish delight. My lasting impression of him was that he was always sitting on his throne on the raised platform, working and working and working. It was carefully positioned to catch the light in just the right way, hence the platform. He talked about work at every family meal. It was just as if his only purpose in life was illustration. He really was the born illustrator. Christmas dinner always had to be like a picture of a family Christmas dinner, complete with kids, cats, open fireplace. He tried to live in his own curious, quirky and often very funny world that he created in his imagination. Why else would he buy himself a bubble car, other than the image of him, round and balding, driving it back from Soho, a little over the limit? You can almost imagine the policeman scratching his head with a pencil. His drawings were a parody of life experienced. Quentin, my brother, goes on to mention, how about Catherine, the tall Lucy Clayton model doing the Charleston with a short, plump and unglamorous Ted? Hilarious! Just the subject matter of one of his early cartoons. And Snuff! Who would seriously take Snuff? Only an Ardizzone cartoon character. I worship Grandpa. This is Quentin still speaking. I still feel a fundamental connection. It is that powerful combination of almost folklore and a tradition with high, pure artistic intent, always humble, always humorous, never pretentious. Mama told me that he was very unsure of himself. He told her one day, I think they quite like me, as if surprised that anyone should consider him an artist at all. I remember him saying that he considered himself to be a draftsman and that his job was to draw well. He also said that he earned about the same amount as a skilled typesetter, and this was correct because typesetters were skilled as he was. He respected good lithographers. My impression was that his job was to get on and do pictures, but his vocation was to put the artistic magic into them. He says, I was just drawing a row of apartment blocks and noticing the EA influence. My brain can't process drawings separately from his viewpoint. Early years in the young Ardizzone and the birth of characters. The family returned from Haiphong, where my grandfather was born, to East Bergholt in Suffolk. His mother was an accomplished watercolourist who had trained in Paris. She admired Constable, so it's no coincidence that she rented a house a spit from East Bergholt. The location from the location of the Haywain. His father was generally absent, returning to East Bergholt only occasionally. My grandfather's mother eventually went back overseas with his sister, not to return for some years. For those years, he was brought up by his grandmother, a portly woman with an explosive temper, forewarned by her turning dark scarlet before an outburst. A temper that was mollified as fast as it erupted. She's probably the model for the one-toothed Nurse Matilda, a referential character along with the stout cook, the governess repeating an illustration of books and scenarios. Later, when his mother and father returned to England, the family moved to Ipswich. When not at school, idly drawing in the margins of his textbook, my grandfather spent his time exploring the harbour, a fascination for the activity of the docks and ships. Emboldened after the arrival of his cousin Arthur, who was an adventurous boy, they would get themselves invited on board ships by whoever was left in charge while their mates were in the pub. They would explore the bridge to the engine room, soaking up the atmosphere of these small coasters, HGVs of the time, as featured in Little Tim. As I write this, I wonder if Arthur is the model for Ginger. Psychoanalytically, I wonder if his parents' absence for many of his formative years are the principal experiences that underpin Tim's character, who, even as a child, I used to regard as a tragic, rather lonesome figure. Loss featured heavily in the Tim books. Parenting seems peripatetic. The closest thing to family for Tim was the ship's crew and the ship's cat. Captain McPhee was the closest thing to a dad, Ginger, a brother, and Charlotte, his sister. For me, little Tim, born well before me and born again many times after, never aging as I grew older, lived in factional space. We spent holidays in Deal, in a house on the front called Otter's Hatch, looking out across the coast, seeing France in the distance, digging lugworms, balancing on groins and frolicking in the waves that broke on the steep shingle beach, the very beach where little Tim played with his friend Ginger and Charlotte. Sorry, I've been completely forgetting to tell you to ask you to change pictures. Here we are, Tim and Ginger and Charlotte playing on the beach. And maybe if I stand like that, I can show you the thing. Yeah. Never ages ago, we spent holidays seeing France in the distance, digging lugworms, balancing on the groins, and frolicking in the waves that broke on the steep shingle beach, the very beach where little Tim played with his friends Ginger and Charlotte. Tim's parents' house was based on my grandfather's brother, David's house, in Warmer. Just like the illustrations, I could see before me families huddled, hiding behind the groins and the windbreaks, children playing in boats. I've sat with my grandfather as he sketched the vignettes, unobtrusively observing, soaking in the dance of life. Little Tim adventures are a blend of Kent and early memories of Ipswich. Change picture, please. My grandfather loved Kent, and after leaving the towering ceilings of 130, my grandparents moved to a tiny vertical cottage with a winding staircase as steep and as narrow as you would find on any boat. A large studio was built in the garden, which became the venue for drawing, Christmases and parties. It lacked the grit of Elgin Avenue, but became the muse for many drawings of apple orchards, bucolic scenes and illustrated letters. He bought a house in Golden Street, Deal, just off the seafront, that latterly became a retreat for his grandchildren as he grew older and less capable of coping with the steep stairs that seemed to confront him everywhere. My grandfather's play with us was unique and very special, but also makes my skin crawl with our recognition of the complacency of his genius. On old copies of the Times, he would draw us fantasy figures, angels and monsters to pin up along the almost vertical staircase in the cottage. We would create eerie lighting for our ghost walks and tread the stairs with howls and screams, tearing down the pictures as we ascended them. My mother was wide-eyed and furious at thoughtless, destructive behaviour, exclaiming, "Do you understand what you're doing?" My grandfather's influence on me is profound. I've worked in film and television as a director and a director of photography for 30 years. There is not a scene or a composition that has not had an EA mark on it. It becomes embedded. My sister Susanna mentioned to me on how there's a genetic string that threads through the line. When I look at his illustrations, I see drama, I see a play taking place, I find myself in a stolen moment within a larger event. I feel like a voyeur looking on an unravelling scene. Through the few simple lines, my grandfather creates a complex lyrical view into other lives, be it of war, upside-down worlds, adventures at sea, or interiors of pubs. Chris has created something very, very special here. It's very rare to see such a collection of pictures. It's a privilege to walk through this room and view a wonderful collection of works, many of them belonging in series and related to text, but individually they're very, very special. Make a point as you walk around to pause and really look at them. Spend the time to engage and feed yourself into the moment with the characters. Make the drawings fit your story. The pictures give you a clear lens through which you can see the sensitivity, gentleness and charm of my grandfather. Each scene expressed through the pen with a human touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really entertaining. I think there's no room for complacency about his genius after listening to that. And I feel even more poignant that I never met him. I bet you all do as well. Dominic, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for coming this evening.